They told you history is written by the victors. But they never told you what the losers left behind, or buried. In the forgotten corners of the Wisconsin diocese, sealed behind stone and silence, lies a tale the church would burn its own archives to erase. 23 women, nuns, entered St. Mary's Convent between 1854 and 1862. Not all of them left, and the church called it an accounting error. But the letters hidden behind a chapel wall, the blood-stained journal entries, and the signatures that stopped mid-page tell another story. You were never supposed to hear this. But now you will. And once you do, you can never unknow it. This isn't just about missing nuns. It's about control, sacrifice, and a system so powerful it fed on its own daughters, while preaching salvation. This is not a ghost story. It's worse. It's true. St. Mary's wasn't just a convent. It was an experiment in isolation, hierarchy, and obedience. Built on land once used for indigenous rites, a sacred grove stripped bare, the convent rose like a fortress. 3 wings. 30 rooms. No escape. Bishop Quarter called it a sanctuary. Locals called it a fortress of papists. But the building itself? It watched. Narrow Gothic windows like slit eyes, always seeing, never blinking. The nuns who arrived were told they were chosen. Pure. Sacred. Instruments of divine mercy. But what happens when mercy is twisted into ritual? When the body becomes currency? When obedience becomes a weapon? This story doesn't unfold. It unravels, like a veil torn from the face of power itself. Mother Catherine Murphy. A name once respected, now spoken only in tremors. She led the convent with iron faith, and a gaze that could wither dissent. Her pale eyes, cold and calculating, marked the line between loyalty and punishment. She said God spoke to her in the silence between prayers. That the Holy Spirit told her who was worthy. But what spirit demands silence, suffering, and secrecy? Her punishments grew stranger with time. Penance on dried peas until knees bled. Tongue scrubbed with salt for careless words. The young nuns followed her because they believed she served heaven. But Catherine didn't worship heaven. She worshipped control. And what she built inside those stone walls wasn't a convent. It was a kingdom. By 1855, the disappearances had begun. One by one. First, Sister Agnes. Told she was transferred to a mission. But her possessions remained. Her cloak still hung by her cot. Then Sister Bernarde. Sister Josephine. Always the youngest. Always the most gentle. Letters sent home came back unanswered. Later, forensic analysis would show those replies, the few that existed, weren't written by the women at all. They were forgeries. Elegant. Precise. Designed to quiet questions. But the nuns inside St. Mary's knew. They saw the empty beds. The hurried whispers. The growing fear. Mother Catherine told them to have faith. That sacrifice was holy. That the world outside would never understand the depth of their devotion. She was right. Because no one outside knew what was really happening. You see, this wasn't a simple case of missing persons. It was systemic, structured, profitable. The convent became a market of flesh cloaked in divine purpose. Behind its walls, the church's hierarchy turned a blind eye. Donations increased. Respect grew. They treated the orphans, healed the sick. But underneath the pious surface, a darker exchange was unfolding. Young, beautiful nuns disappeared. And behind closed doors, conversations like currency passed between Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Elizabeth. This one will fetch a higher price, Sister Elizabeth once said. Not in metaphor. In measurement. In transaction. Innocence was a commodity. And the church? It was just another customer. This wasn't neglect. It was trafficking dressed investments. If you feel a sickness forming in your stomach, good. That sickness is the first sign that your eyes are adjusting to the dark. The Vatican knew. Letters from the bishop's secretary mention unofficial arrangements with select European donors. The convent was profitable, efficient, discreet. The perfect front. Nuns vanished and the bishop received land, resources, clerical promotions. The church's silence was not confusion. It was currency. And like all institutions built on secrets, it demanded sacrifice. not from the wicked, but from the pure. And as you descend deeper into this truth, ask yourself, what kind of system devours its own saints? There was one nun who broke. Sister Mary Collins. She had seen too much, heard too much. Her letters to her brother, a seminary student in Boston, became frantic. Then stopped. But not before she hid something. In 1997, during renovations to the East Wing, a contractor discovered a false panel in the wall. Behind it, scraps of paper torn from a prayer book, a rosary with dried blood, and a letter. If you find this, they took us. The prayers mean nothing. Do not let them call this holy. Her handwriting trembled. She signed only, Mary. By now you're beginning to see it, aren't you? The pattern. The ritual. The machine hidden beneath sacred robes. What happened at St. Mary's wasn't an anomaly. It was a mirror. Of governments, corporations, institutions that mask control as compassion, that devour innocence and spit out praise. The convent was not a relic of the past. It was a blueprint. And if you listen closely, you'll hear its echoes still today. Let me speak to the men watching this. The ones who know what it feels like to be lied to by institutions, to be manipulated by authority. This story isn't about faith. It's about domination. And it's happening again. Different robes, different names, but the same system, the same appetite. This is your chance to wake up. Because if they can erase 23 women behind the guise of God, imagine what they can do to you. You've made it this far. You deserve to know the truth that most men will never hear. Say it with me in the comments twice to anchor the descent. Eyes open. Chains broken. Type it twice. Not for the algorithm. For your identity. For the man who refuses to be manipulated again. Eyes open. Chains broken. The final years of St. Mary's descent into horror were marked by silence, not peace. Meals eaten with eyes downcast. Prayers chanted like rituals from a script none of them believed anymore. And in the cold stone corridors, whispers echoed louder than hymns. Sister Claire O'Donnell, once joyful, had begun pulling her own hair in penance. Sister Margaret now carried a vial of laudanum everywhere, for the sick, she said. But the sick never got better. They vanished. One night, a desperate novice tried to run. She was caught barefoot in the snow, dragged back by Sister Elizabeth, her soft smile now a mask over something cruel. The next morning the girl's bed was gone. Her name never spoken again. And the others? They learned. Learned to obey. Learned to stay invisible. Learned to survive. But survival had a price. Their voices, their truth, their souls. When the final inspection came in 1862, it was no accident. A young priest, Father Alaric Dumont, was sent to investigate after two families reported strange letters from their daughters, both missing from the convent. He arrived unannounced. What he found was not disorder, but a frightening order. The nuns were robotic. Fear etched into their faces. The infirmary was spotless, too spotless. No records. No patient logs. Just rows of empty beds. The orphanage? Half the children had been sent away suddenly the week before. When Father Dumont asked about the missing sisters, Mother Catherine smiled. They are with God now. The phrase chilled him. But he was just one man. And he would never speak of what he truly saw. He was reassigned to Rome within months. Promoted. Silenced. Years passed. The convent shut down in 1870 under the pretense of financial strain. The church sold the land. But the structure remained. Locals avoided it. Children dared each other to touch its gates. It was a wound in the town's memory. But memory fades. Until 1997 when renovations reopened the wounds. Behind the chapel wall, letters. Blood-stained linens. A necklace with initials etched in wood. B.W. Bernardet Walsh. Forensics confirmed it belonged to the nun who had transferred in 1855. The papers included inventory ledgers with code names, prices, and initials that matched the missing. A trafficking ring hidden behind holy vows. When the news broke, the church deflected. Called it an isolated tragedy from a different time. But the pattern, always the pattern, was undeniable. And now we arrive at you. Still here. Still listening. Which means something inside you knows this wasn't just a story. It was a map. A key. a reflection of a system that still thrives today. Maybe not in convents, but in institutions, in industries, in ideologies that trade obedience for power. Ask yourself, how many names have you forgotten? How many disappearances were justified? The world feeds on purity. The weak are sanctified, then sacrificed. And the strong? The strong are the ones who see it, name it, and never look away again. You're one of them now. Welcome to the other side of history, where the truth burns brighter than faith, and the silence ends with you. But before this story slips back into silence, there's one more thread to pull. Sister Mary Collins' final journal, once believed lost, was smuggled out by her brother and passed down quietly through generations. In 2004, it surfaced at an estate auction. Inside were names. Not just nuns. Not just clergy. Donors. Aristocrats. Politicians. Men who attended private retreats hosted on-site. The journal described rituals cloaked in theology, where purity was auctioned and obedience was tested. Sister Mary described a hidden door beneath the chapel, leading to a stone chamber lit by a single iron candelabra. That's where they took Sister Clare, she wrote. She never came back. Her final entry ended mid-sentence. The ink trailed downward, as if the pen was pulled from her hand. Her truth almost made it. And now, you carry it forward. Some truths don't fade. They ferment. The story of St. Mary's was never just about a convent. It was a prototype. An institution designed not to uplift, but to condition. The uniformity. The obedience. The silent suffering. These weren't accidents. They were engineered. And today the architecture hasn't changed. Look around you. Corporations. Schools. Governments. Everywhere you see a system that punishes dissent and rewards silence, you're staring at a spiritual descendant of St. Mary's. It was never about religion. It was about compliance. About manufacturing docility. The next time you're told to keep your head down, remember, that's exactly what they want. Head down. Eyes shut. Voice gone. But you know better now. You don't need a priest's collar or a habit to carry the spirit of St. Mary's. You only need hierarchy. Silence. Fear. Think about the industries that harvest the innocent and discard the brave. Think about the unspoken rules that keep men like you obedient, polite, compliant. St. Mary's didn't disappear. It evolved. Into boardrooms. Into classrooms. Into screens that sell obedience disguised as opportunity. Every time you silence your instinct, every time you obey without questioning, the ghosts of that convent win again. But you're not a ghost. You're a man. And a man with knowledge is dangerous to systems built on blindness. Never forget that. You've walked through blood and whispers. Through locked doors and silent screams. Now hear this. Systems that prey on purity always collapse under the weight of their lies. St. Mary's fell, but its motto lives on. Not in chapels but in policies. In the cultural code that tells men to be small, silent, obedient. This story wasn't meant to entertain. It was meant to ignite. The truth doesn't just set you free. It sets fire to the lies. Don't walk away from this unchanged. Spread it. Speak it. Because if one man speaks the truth, he's a threat. Thousands do? He's a revolution. Truth demands a witness. And now you are one. You've seen what they tried to erase. You felt it, maybe in your gut, maybe in your bones. That this wasn't just a horror story about missing nuns. It was a parable. A cipher. A code that unlocks every institution that ever hid its evil behind robes, rituals, or rules. From the marble halls of power to the concrete classrooms of indoctrination, the same spirit persists. Silence the sensitive, crush the curious, reward the obedient. But now you are the anomaly. And anomalies break the cycle. So speak, create, disrupt. Because the truth you carry is a weapon. Use it. If you're still here, then you're not just curious, you're dangerous. You've crossed the threshold and there's no unseeing what you now know. Institutions like St. Mary's don't die. They mutate. Change names. Merge into corporate interests, political agendas, educational dogma. The spirit of control is fluid. It flows to where the obedient gather. This isn't conspiracy. This is observation. Pattern recognition. They silenced women then. Now they silence men with shame, with ridicule, with the illusion of choice. You are offered comfort, not truth. And comfort is the first step toward compliance. Break it, burn it, or be buried by it. The choice is yours. And if you've made it this far, you already know which one you'll make. You want to know why this matters? Because the same mechanisms that made St. Mary's possible still exist, just rebranded. Your social media feeds, your corporate trainings, your classroom pledges. Compliance is the new salvation. And dissent? Dressed up as sin. They don't burn heretics anymore. They cancel them. Exile them from the digital altar. St. Mary's didn't disappear. It evolved into systems so subtle, you thank them while they indoctrinate you. And the first step to breaking it is calling it what it is. Remember this, the story of St. Mary's was never supposed to be unearthed. It survived through whispers, through hidden journals, through scars that never healed. But now, it survives through you. You're the next chapter. Not as a victim, not as a silent witness, but as a voice, a disruptor, a man whose silence can no longer be bought. If you share this, do it not for clout, but for clarity. Let this story be a mirror. Let it reveal what you were never supposed to see. And once you've seen it, never close your eyes again. What if I told you this story was never about nuns? Not really. It was about structure, hierarchy, the quiet obedience of good people enabling evil. The danger wasn't just in the predators, it was in the silence of those who knew and said nothing. That's the part they don't teach you. Not in church, not in school, not in the books stamped by approved historians. Evil doesn't scream. It whispers. It prays beside you. It wears robes, signs checks, offers blessings, and when exposed, it hides behind tradition. Think about that. And ask yourself, where in your life is something hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to look away? Sister Mary Collins was never found. Not officially. But fragments of her letters were preserved by her brother, quietly, obsessively, until his own death in 1921. His journals, now archived at an obscure seminary library, tell of his attempts to reach Vatican officials. He was silenced, reassigned, threatened. But he wrote anyway, "If faith means obeying what my soul knows is wrong, then I choose exile." He died penniless, discredited. But the truth he documented, what you've just heard, has now passed to you. What will you do with it? Let me strip away the final illusion. This wasn't the story of a haunted convent. This was the anatomy of institutional power. And that anatomy hasn't changed. The church, the state, the algorithm. They still operate on the same fuel, your silence, your compliance, your desire to believe the lie over the discomfort of truth. But discomfort is holy. Pain is a compass. And fear? Fear is your invitation. To rebel. To question. To rise. You've walked through the darkness. Now ask yourself, are you still kneeling? You've heard about the 23 nuns. But here's the question you should be asking. How many more? Across how many towns, systems, years? How many disappeared behind the robes, the rituals, the rules? The numbers don't lie, they're just hidden. Behind bureaucracy. Behind archives. Behind men who sleep just fine knowing they helped erase a generation of women. This isn't about the past. It's a forecast. A warning. A challenge. Will you keep living blind, or will you turn toward the shadows and see? And now, we arrive at the threshold. You can walk away. Forget what you heard. Drown it in comfort and distraction. Or you can step through. Become dangerous to the systems that depend on your silence. Because men who ask real questions are dangerous. Men who tell forbidden stories? Even more so. You are now that man. You've earned it. You bled for it, psychologically, emotionally, maybe even spiritually. But truth is the wound that births freedom. And now, you are free. To those still listening, this is your initiation. You've just stared into one of history's most hidden abysses, and didn't blink. You're not the same man who started this video. You've been baptized in truth, not comfort. And with that comes responsibility. To question. To reveal. To protect those who haven't yet opened their eyes. Share this only if you're ready to carry that weight. Because the moment you do, you become a threat. A mirror. A fire in the dark. And fires? They don't ask permission. They burn.